Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spit Talk, flowing fits and opinions with your host, Gunny G. We're service member, self-service, period. Follow, like, subscribe everywhere you get your podcast and on most social media platforms. Let us know how we're doing. Any criticism is good criticism. We're going to get right into it. We got a special guest. I'll let him introduce himself, where he's at, and all his good stuff. Connor, I'm going to call you Connor because I can't say Seamus.
Yeah. I'll explain that.
Let us know where you're at. Give us the potatoes, duty stations, prior service, retired, things like that. Duty stations, billets, collaterals, and deployments.
So my full name is James Benjamin Conner, and that'll come into play here in just a second. So I'm originally from Newark, Delaware. I was recruited out of Wilmington, Delaware in 1997. All throughout my high school and the first half of my Marine Corps career, I was known as Benny or Ben. And then when I moved to Europe, I got stationed in Germany. I started using my first name just because every time I traveled, it was like, okay, I'm never going to see these people again. I'm just going to put James on the paperwork because that's what's on my passport. And then everybody just started calling me James. So, and then Seamus, that's Irish for James. And I got that name years ago as a young Marine after spending the night with a bottle of Jameson Irish whiskey. So you can imagine how that night went. So really, it just depends on where I'm at in the world, how I'm known. So I was, I started out as an infantryman, 0311. I was with 2-1, 3-1, 1-9. And then I found myself in a unique situation where I got to go over to MARSOC when they activated. And I worked at the schoolhouse there for a couple years as an instructor before lap moving into the 0211 field, counterintelligence, human intelligence, where I finished out my career. So I was stationed in California for about 6 years, North Carolina, Camp Lejeune for about 8 years, and then I spent 2 years in Stuttgart, Germany, working out of MARPOR URAF headquarters.
And that's where you're at now?
Decided, you know what, I don't want to be stuck in a laboratory, so this ain't for me. So now I'm just kind of hanging out. It's a new year, 2025, and I'm planning my next move. So
you never came back, huh?
I've never come back. Well, not permanently. I've been back twice. Once for a funeral and once for my son's graduation from Paris Island. So,
man. When did you graduate?
That's him back there.
Let me see if I can move my screen, huh? Oh, I see that.
He graduated in August. So
congratulations.
And it was a nice reunion because not only did I get to see my son, but one of my old battalion XOs, he's pretty active in the retired community down there in Beaufort, South Carolina. And then when I took my son to infantry school, I got to meet up with my old company Gunny from Fallujah, who is now Sergeant Major Dave Wilson of UMEF. And I actually got to meet a master sergeant, too, who used to work for me when I was a gunny. And now he's a master sergeant. So, it's always nice to see the people that used to work for you, go past you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Different strokes, different strokes, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so a couple more things real quick. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
I did a couple MU deployments pre-9/11, which I'll probably get into in a bit. Back when they used to put SEALs on the MU, couple peacetime MUs, then 9/11 happened, deployed to Iraq about 3 times, led a rifle squad in the Second Battle of Fallujah, and then when I lap moved into CI, I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan with various special ops units, and then when I was in Germany, I was working out of the G2X, so I was doing stuff for EUCOM, SOCUR, AFRICOM. It was supposed to be a staff billet, but we had a very small staff. So when the combatant command said, hey, we need somebody to go do something, like, hey, get your stuff, you got to go.
Lowest man on totem pole, huh? Hit it.
But I'm not complaining, though. It was a great time.
I bet. You never came back. All the sightseeing you did. Yeah, you look great. You seem great. You got a nice little backdrop pictures there. You have family.
Yep. There's a bunch of my European collectibles. Of course, I got my dedicated Philadelphia Eagles shelf up there. And
No.
and then around the place, I got various pictures of anatomy. So I'll spare anybody looking at those.
You said Eagles?
Oh, yeah.
I feel sorry. Oh my gosh. Let me do something for you. That's the colors of America's team.
Are you sure about that?
Maybe not this year. You guys are doing great though this year.
Oh, yeah. Of course, it's the end of the season, and there's a little bit of a drama going on right now, but we have our final game on Sunday. So, and the great thing about sports, you say we, like you're a member of the team, right? But
yeah. That's true.
My contribution to the season is streaming from this side of the Atlantic Ocean.
Hey, that's what's up. Look, I'll tell you what, you look great for your service. You retired, right?
Yeah, I retired in 2017. I did take a job for a little while. I was making really good money at Marsoc. I loved the people that I worked with, but sitting behind a desk just wasn't for me. So after about 7 months, that's when I decided to go back to school and just go in a whole another direction.
Are you teaching or what are you doing with your degree?
And, in Fallujah, I was injured. I was shot 3 times by an surgeon, but then I stayed in and had a pretty successful career. But by the time, and of course, like I said, I did a bunch of deployments with soft units. By the time I did my final physical, they're like, man, your back is shot. Your knees are spent, your shoulders are worn out. And I was just like, can I still squat? And they're like, just don't go past 90 degrees. I'm like, okay, if you say so. So when I was at my civilian job, and it was the year that the Eagles had won the Super Bowl. So I'd spend a lot of time eating cheesecakes and hanging out at Buffalo Wild Wings and stuff like that, and packed on a few pounds that I didn't want. So I had this job that I was unhappy at, and I found I started hiding out in the gym. I was like, I'm not happy with myself. I'm not happy with where I'm at post-retirement. I'm going to just go hide out in the gym and try to make some corrections. And I got really fit. I lost a lot of weight. I was feeling good. My head was clear. And people around the office were like, man, you look great. Like, what are you doing? They started asking me for some pointers. And I was like, well, I'm doing this. And then I started thinking, maybe this could be a side gig, So I signed up to do a personal trainer certification. And then in the process, I started off reading like blog articles on like Live Strong and Healthline, and reading all this, what foods make me burn fat? How many blueberries can one person eat? Things like that. And then, avocados, that's the healthy fat. So I was reading this stuff, and then I would start to look at the little numbers where they had the footnotes, and I would click on the footnote and be like, why are these people coming to this conclusion? So I click on the footnote, some scientific paper would come up, and scientific papers aren't that hard to read until you like get into the meat and potatoes. If you just want to know what the paper's about and the conclusion, yeah, you can read that. But if you want to really say, okay, how did they come to this conclusion? So that's the part that I was missing. And
here,
yep.
State of Washington, go ahead.
Is that where you're at?
That's where I'm at.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you guess where I'm at too.
I know where you're at, and the name is escaping me. I keep wanting to say Bangor, but that's on the other side.
That's it.
Is it Bangor? Okay. Because there's a Bangor in Maine too.
There is.
Okay. But yeah, so I was like, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I could go to school for this. And so that's what I did. In the meantime, I had a lot of friends who, coming back from the wars, they had a lot of TBIs, a lot of PTSD, which, I feel like I came out pretty good considering everything I had been through. But as I was learning all this stuff, and a lot of them were having complications with their meds, they get prescribed one thing and it wouldn't work. And then the doctors would say, well, here, try this one instead, and that doesn't work. And then they start messing with the dose, and that wasn't working. But the more that I was reading, I was finding all this stuff out about mental health, and it was not coming out of the medical side, but it was actually coming out of like the sports and exercise and nutrition community. Huh, really? So that's when I decided to pursue a degree in sports and exercise science. And in my program, at the end of the degree program, I actually spent more time on looking at the effects of exercise in disease and mental health. And I had actually did my dissertation on the effects of resistance training on anxiety. That's the actual title was much longer, but that's the gist of it. And I feel very fortunate because my supervisor in Ireland, who was actually, he was the other American guy there, his name was Matt Herring. And man, this guy's got like probably somewhere around 50 published. He authored or co-authored 50 published papers on the effects of exercise, specifically resistance training with mental health. And, it was just a really cool place to be. And some of the PhD students that I got to meet and work with, they were all studying this. They've had stuff published in national magazines about their work. So yeah, that's the very roundabout way of how I got here. So then once I finished my degree and I was like, well, okay, this is cool. I did a couple projects on lifting weights and cancer. So I was like, man, I want to go a little bit deeper, because another one of my teachers always encouraged us. He said, look, when you come in to do this oral presentation, I don't want to hear, exercise is good for diabetes. He's like, get down to the molecular level and explain what's going on. And once I started doing that, like, it was like it's kind of like going down a YouTube wormhole. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just clicking. Oh, look, this activates that cell and this acts that cell. And I just found it very, very fascinating. So I wanted to do a master's and actually get more to the root of some of these diseases. And we actually spent some time. One of my teachers was a lady who had done some work with the Belgian military and PTSD. So yeah. So what am I doing now? That's what you would ask me. So after I've done all this stuff, and then I decided I didn't want to spend time at a laboratory, I just kind of took a knee, and I'm facing outboard right now, planning my next move. Ultimately, trying to figure out how I can continue to help and educate the military, veteran, and first responders community, just teaching them how to take care of themselves. And I spend a lot of time, writing articles on my own website and LinkedIn and just trying to answer people's questions if they have them.
That's good. That's good. Look, James, how do you say Seamus? Seamus. That's right. That's right. Seamus. I like Seamus better.
It's funny because one of my teachers in Ireland, he's like, because one of our assignments was, he's like, hey, go do this assignment and then tweet me when you finish it. Here's my handle. Well, my handle is Seamus O'Connor, as you can see it. And he looks at me in class and he goes, is your name James or Seamus? And I told him the story. I'm like, look, man, whatever. And he's like, I'm going to call you Seamus. And I said, okay. And then like for the next 4 years, all my classmates who are like 18, 19 years old, they're trying to figure out, what's that guy's name? Is it James or Seamus or what? I think some of them still haven't figured it out, though.
Oh, shoot. Let me ask you. Retirement, transition, didn't come back. Before we get all to the meat potatoes, what was the catalyst for you going to Marsoc to Intel?
Essentially, I got promoted out of a job. When Marsoc stood up,
was it like 2010 or something? 2008, 2010 or something
I think it was around 2006 was maybe when they decided, okay, we're going to have a Marsoc. And then I went over there in 2008. And at the time, they were just kind of grabbing bodies. So they took a chunk out of what used to be SOTG, and now it's EOTG. And they said, okay, you guys are now Marsoc Special Operations Schoolhouse, and you're going to do all that unconventional direct action and all that stuff. But they were still using the model of, they had a force reconnaissance platoon, which would be like the direct action element, and then a platoon of grunts, which would provide security for the direct action. I went over there as a sergeant. I had met the Marsoc recruiter because I had done like it was my 6th or 7th, maybe 8th deployment. And I was like, man, I need a break, and I need a break from the grunts. And I met the Marsoc recruiter. He's like, man, look, you've been through a lot. He's like, I don't know if I will put you out in the field right away. He's like, how would you like to come work for me at the schoolhouse? And I'm like, man, you mean like I still get to do all that cool stuff and then I can go home at the end of the day? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, roger that. He's like, come over and take over the trailer platoon course. I said, okay, cool. So I went over there, and at the time, because they did not have these, 80 series for the Marsoc MOSs, the force guys were still 03 tons, and the grunts were still grunts. And there was, I think, 3 of us 0311s. and they had one billet for an 0369, which was filled by a guy who was working on the A&S, the assessment and selection side of the house. So once I got promoted to staff sergeant, MARSOC kind of started to change things up. I had gone to jump school, and they kind of did away with the force platoon, trailer platoon model and went more towards what they have now, which is probably more similar to the way the Green Berets do it, where everybody can do everybody's job and they're interchangeable and all this. And there's one MOS. So when I got promoted to staff sergeant, like, hey, you're going to have to figure something out because we can't hold on to it unless you want to go to A&S and this and that and the other. And I knew that after like playing with the big boys, I didn't want to go back to the grunts. Like I couldn't deal with some gunny making me hang around on a field day, So I had been recruited by the CI guys after my first deployment to Iraq, and I just kind of put that on the back burner. So now that I was faced with this decision that I had to make, we had a CI rep at the schoolhouse, and I started talking to him, and he put me in touch with the recruiters over at Second Intel, and I made it over there, and that was it. So, yeah, essentially I got promoted out of a job is what happened.
That's crazy. That's crazy. It's like you would think you'd be grandfather or something because you already there, but it was almost like what's that thing called?
Well, the other guys that were there, one guy ended up sticking around, and two guys actually ended up sticking around. I think one actually went to A&S. I think the other one just kind of got absorbed into the pipeline. Another one had gone off and became an 0321 and went out to a recon unit somewhere, and then I went off to CI Human, which turned out to be a fantastic experience. And my entire career has really just been like, I don't know if it's luck, divine intervention, or a series of coincidences, all the way back to when I graduated SOI. I've just always found myself in these really unique situations, as some kid from Newark, Delaware, my first unit. They're like, hey, you're going to be working with Force Recon and the SEALs. And I'm like, what?
That's pretty dope. For you, I'd say divine intervention. For me, when I came in 2010, it was everything, duty station, promotion, just the way my career's been taking the road is, for me, divine intervention is kind of purposeful. Everything happens for a reason. So I'd agree with you, James. Just probably divine intervention. No way that's that many coincidences. You know what I mean?
I will say a real wake-up call was, on the streets of Fallujah. I will tell you, without going into graphic detail, how many times that I probably should have been eliminated, and yet I was not. So the only conclusion that I had was the man upstairs was not done with me and had a plan for me.
Absolutely. And that you got stationed out. You said in Ireland, or was it Germany?
Germany.
Last one?
Yeah.
Germany. And he just never came back. Why was that?
Pretty well. I did come back for my retirement, but I will say that part of it had to do with a woman. So when I was stationed in Stuttgart, MAR4, what's now MAR4 URAF, used to be two commands. It was MAR4 UR and MAR4 AF. And when I got there, I was to become the senior enlisted guy for the G2X on the MAR4 UR side. And then the senior guy on the MAR4 AF side was a master sergeant. And then they decided to combine the two units and make MAR4 URAF, which meant I went down a rung on the totem pole. And, it's a very small shop, a very small community. We all knew everybody. We all took care of each other. And they felt kind of bad that I got sent out there to be a senior enlisted guy. And then I got bumped, through no fault of my own. So they're like, how do we do this guy's fit rep? Because we can't make it look like he got demoted or whatever. So the senior said, now we had two warrant officers as well. It was really bizarre. It'll be too confusing to explain because now we were one command with one enlisted rank structure, but two officer rank structure. So it was crazy. But the Africa side outranked the Europe side. And a guy pulls me in. He says, look, man, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make you in charge of the CI program, the counterintelligence program. I said, all right, well, that's cool. I like counterintelligence. I said, what do I need to do? He said, well, we don't have a counterintelligence program, so you need to build it. I said, okay, I can do that. I said, what do you want me to do? He's like, I don't even know. Go to the references, just start putting something together and check in with me once a week. I said, hey, roger that, sir. So it was great. I pretty much had carte blanche. I was talking to the Army. I was talking to all the different federal agencies that were stationed out there. We had a team of Green Berets down the road. We had the SEALs down the road, different special ops units, different civilian units. I was doing all that work with UCOM and SOCUR and AFRICOM and SOCAF. So I built this whole program, and pretty much what it was a lot of debriefing and training and education for the command, but it was also a lot of liaison because a lot of these other units didn't know that the Marines had a certain limited but special capability right there in the house. And I mean, the Army guys used to be like, hey, man, we're going to go do this counterintelligence investigation. Do you want to come with us? I'm like, hell yeah. Or NCIS or somebody might be like, hey, we got this going on, but since why don't you take lead of that and just keep us informed? I'm like, hey, no problem, man. So in that respect, it was great. I had a great time out there. I spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe and didn't really get to see much of Western Europe. When I was at, my civilian job, and I decided that I was going to go back to school, I started to look and see, is there somewhere I can go to school in Europe? Because at the time I did have at the time, she's here with me now, but my girlfriend was still in Europe. And I wanted to come back, and, we had plans to see Western Europe and all this stuff. And then I found out that I could use the GI Bill to study overseas. So that's what I did. And I just, short. One of the things with the Irish is, we don't know how to tell a short story. So my long story, it's like, here's a long story long.
That's all good. I love it.
And everything is always in a big roundabout circle,
Weaving it back.
The weave. Yes. I'm practicing with you for when I get on when Joe Rogan calls me up.
Big time. You got 03. You went to Marsaw before it actually started up. Intel. Overseas. Retired overseas. For a lady friend you're still with?
Yep.
That you're married?
No, we both agreed we weren't going to pull that trigger unless it was an emergency. But no, she's, to be fair, and much to her credit, I probably wouldn't have done half of the stuff that I've done since I retired had she not been there pushing me along the way. Like just a couple weeks ago, I finally took this certification test that I've been putting off for years. And she's like, it's the end of the year. It's on your things to do. Just go do it. If you don't pass, you can do it again later, but at least go do it. And then I did it and I passed. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Let me ask your son. Where did he come about?
How's that again?
Your son?
Yeah.
How did he come about? Where did he come about from?
Man, do we have to have the talk?
Birds and the bees and the bees and the birds.
Yeah. No, so I've been married twice, and I had 2 kids from my first marriage and 1 from my second marriage. My 2 older kids, when that marriage kind of fell apart, they came with me, and when we left the U.S., they came with me as well, and they pretty much they kind of grew up in Europe. I mean, they weren't by any means toddlers when we left, but kind of those, what do they call them, the formidable years, I guess, they spent in between Romania and Ireland. When I moved to the Netherlands, my daughter was 16 and she didn't care for the Netherlands that much. So, but I said, hey man, look, you're old enough to make your own decisions. If you want to go stay with your mom, then that's what you can do. And, I supported that. My son stayed out here with me, and he had been talking about wanting to join the Marines, which was actually a surprise to me. But so I was trying to track down a recruiter, and then through a friend of mine, one of my old Muse sergeant majors, who actually works at one of the American cemeteries in Belgium, he used his secret sergeant major network to actually track down a recruiter who, there's a couple Marine recruiters based out of Kaiserslautern in Germany at the Army base. And we got hooked up with those guys. And yeah, so my son was recruited out of there, and he could not wait to get into boot camp. So he went in at 17. He wanted to be the first kid from RSS Europe to, make it through basic. So he went there kind of in the summertime, those nice months at Paris Island.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude, that's awesome. That's crazy. I didn't even know there was
Actually,
recruiters out there.
yeah, well, they had one. I think they stuck somebody out there pre-COVID, and then when COVID happened, they pulled him back, and then the spot went unfilled for a long time, and they just recently, and when I say recently, I mean like maybe last year, put these guys out there, and they actually fall under RS New York, but it was really cool because when my son enlisted, I got a hold, like they were going to do this Zoom thing, and I was like, hold on, man, we can't do a Zoom enlistment ceremony. So I got a hold of the guys down in Stuttgart at Marfour RAF because I'd actually met the commanding general at the MSG ball in Amsterdam. And so he gave me his business card, and I hit him up. I was like, hey, sir, this is me. How would you like to swear my son into the Marine Corps? And he was all excited. So we went down there, and then the recruiter's like, hey, I knew you set this up, but would you mind if a couple other guys did it too? I'm like, why are you asking me, man? You're the recruiter. And the CG was just thrilled. So they had like this Devil Dog family day down there at the command at Stuttgart. And then at the end of the family day, they brought my son and the other two guys up there, and they did the enlistment, which is actually on DVids somewhere. So it was pretty cool to, see my son there on DVids getting sworn in.
That's awesome, Seamus. That's awesome.
By the general, and of course the general, it was funny. I guess some of the stories I can't tell. I don't want to get nobody in trouble. But it was cool. My son, he's got a coin from his first challenge coin is from the commanding general of Marfour RAF.
Awesome.
So I was a little bit jealous about that.
Hell yeah. I'd be jealous. A little jealous. Good for him. That's a good moto booster going into basic, you know?
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. Let me, you got deployments on your bill. You got a couple of Mews. You got a couple, none on you. Obviously, a couple of divorces. You got some kids that stayed out there. All to say that there is adversity in front of you. And that boils down to some resilience. What was the best tool for you going after all that said and done? What was the best tool for you to be resilient through all that?
I'll tell you, it took me a while to figure it out. One of the toughest times in my career was...
Go ahead.
So the Second Battle of Fallujah, Al-Fajr, which was 20 years ago, this past November, we lost a lot of guys. And I crunched the numbers one time, and if you look at all the units that were there, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine took the highest casualties. Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines took the most casualties out of the battalion, and my squad alone took the most casualties out of the company. Essentially, you could say my squad took the most casualties out of the battle. I had lost 3 members of one fire team, and one guy was a very important member of the unit. He had been there in the first deployment to Iraq. I mean, this guy, his name's Mike Hanks. They've made videos about him, stories about him. But when the call went out over the internet or over the net that he had been killed, like pretty much the whole battalion was shocked. And between him and he was a team leader, and the first 2 of our guys who got killed were members of his team. So all this being said, so that was, even though I went on to have a very storied career, it took a long time to kind of get past that. And it wasn't so much like the PTSD, but it was a lot of survivor's guilt. And as Marines, we don't like to talk about ourselves. You know what I mean? We always think that that's like a sign of arrogance or something like that. But what I started to learn, by the time I got to 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, and I had a bunch of brand new Marines, I think it was me and maybe 2 Lance Corporals had seen any action because it was a brand new unit. Guys were coming in from B billets who had missed the first 2 parts of the war. I started training these guys, and I was like, if I don't tell them these stories, then they're not going to learn anything. So it's not about me talking about myself to thump my chest. It's about me trying to relay an experience so that these guys can learn from that and, either not make the same mistakes or take notes or whatever to achieve a certain level of success. So that was one way to get around it. Another way was to Mike Hanks' sister, Melissa, who's very, very active in the veteran community. She's on LinkedIn and Instagram and all this. She started a couple different foundations. Her and I became very close over the years. And when I was on my deployment with the Green Berets, it came around the anniversary of Fallujah and the death of her brother. And we had been talking, and we just decided that we weren't going to be sad anymore. And instead of always dreading this day coming around, we just created our own holiday. So now November 17th is Mike Hanks Day. And everybody that was, in the unit or who knew Mike Hanks or whatever, we have this little thing we do, and we post our pictures online or whatever, in our Mike Hanks Day T-shirts and all this and that. So we kind of we literally made it a celebration of life. You hear that. Some people, instead of saying a funeral, they'll say we're having a celebration of life, and then that's kind of the end of it. But we've kept this one going on for years now. So those were a couple things. But then it was in my retirement when I actually went to work on myself and then realized other people could benefit from what I was learning. That was a real game changer for me. And I really started to immerse myself in this whole research process and trying to learn and this, that, and the other. And like, as I said before, I found a lot of, I don't know, solace. Is that the word? Like, the gym became my church.
Yeah. You had some zen there.
Yeah, I loved it. I didn't go in there trying to bench 225. I didn't go in there trying to squat 400 pounds. I went in there and I put 10-pound plates on the bench and said, you know what? I'm just going to work on my form. When I do my squats, I'm going to work on my form when I do whatever. And all that pain that I had when I did my final physical and all those things that I was told I was never going to be able to do again, I was doing them, and I was doing them quite well. In fact, I just did a 1-rep max test at my gym here, and I'm at 48 years old. I'm the strongest that I've ever been. So the way that I dealt with a lot of these hardships was, and I'm not gonna try to say that it came easy, and it took a lot of time, but it was not being afraid to talk about it, reaching out to the community, going to work on myself, and sharing what was working for me. It's not, hey, if you do this, you'll feel great. It's, this is what I'm doing and it's working, if you want to give it a try.
Yeah. That's fair.
I've always been, whenever you take these personality tests, or, if you're into the zodiacs and trying to read the stars or whatever your choice is, mine always come back is service. I'm a man of service. When I was in North Carolina, I used to volunteer with the rescue squads. So for me, being of service to doing this work for other people has given me great joy and satisfaction, and has helped overcome the challenges of the younger me.
That's good. That's actually good. I'll tell you what, that kind of weaved into my next question, but about service members struggling with mental health. It seems like communication, talking about it, instead of having survivor's guilt and putting that on your shoulders. You figured out this is part of life. Celebrate life because life is precious. Life, put it all on your shoulders, and then you wear that rock every single day. And that's good. That's good for those that struggling. I've only heard it a couple times now, and it's not too often that people talk about it. I know the chaps talk about it here in Bangor. He mentioned survivor guilt. Somebody else as well. And you're the third person that mentioned it. Nobody's really mentioned it to me. I'm gonna do some reading up on it. I'm pretty sure that's more common than in the military community than we would admit.
Yeah, I'm failed to mention, but I'm also the current sergeant at arms of our local American Legion post out here, and our post commander was just out at a national convention where they were talking about suicide. And in our post, it's a little bit of an older crowd. I mean, there's not a lot of us. There's enough to make a post, but and so we were talking suicide, and they were rattling off the statistics, and I was like, hey, look, I mean, even now post GWAT, there's still a lot, I don't know the numbers, but there's a lot of service members who kill themselves. And one of the things is, and we always joke about, I can't wait to get out. I can't wait. Some people, they just can't wait to get out. Other people, they say they can't wait to get out. And then when you do, you spent at a minimum 4 years of going to work with your best friends every day, living with these guys, partying with these guys, going to weddings, going to baby births, birthdays at the steakhouse, whatever. And then you EAS, And you think you're just going to go home and pick up where you left off 4 years ago or longer, depending on how long your career was. And it ain't the same, brother. And a lot of people, I don't care if you're Marine Corps, Air Force, whatever, they have a hard time adjusting to that. A lot of times you'll hear senior enlisted guys be like, when you take this uniform off, when you take it off. Yeah, you could take off the uniform and hang it up, but that's still inside you. And when you go back to, when you make that transition and that life isn't there no more, it's not always easy. Plus, now, your paycheck might not be coming every 1st and 15th. You don't have BAH. You don't have the medical and the dental. And now you have all this stuff to worry about that maybe you didn't before. And it can be a real stressor.
Yeah.
And then just the camaraderie. When you have all that financial stress and you don't have anybody to, share the misery with, it can be a very lonely place.
Yeah, and lonely and silent keeps your thoughts going. I tell you what, I've been not fortunate enough to be in those spaces while I'm on active duty, and I find myself looking to my brother and sister for some help. Not only that, but my spouse. She's a big shoulder. She carries a lot on her shoulders for good reason. But yeah, I tell you what, that lonely time, that silent time gets your mind going in the wrong place, especially when you transition. That'd be a no-go for some service members, because we're in the uniform, mission set. Taskers need to get done. Execution, commanders and all these things that were kind of ingrained in us. And then we drop it. The uniform goes away.
There's a guy out here, a lot of Air Force guys out here in our post, and he retired a couple months back, and I pulled him off to the side, and I said, look, man, the first couple weeks are going to be great. You don't have to get up and do nothing or whatever. I said, give it some time. You give me a holler if you just want to go out and get a cup of coffee or whatever. And then I didn't see him for a couple weeks, and then I saw him at an event. I said, hey, man, how's retirement treating you? He's like, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, it's driving me crazy. I said, I told you it was going to happen, man. Like, I'm only right down the road. Give me a holler. We'll go out and, I don't know, go sightseeing or something. But, yeah, it's weird. And, not to beat a dead horse, but then, of course, if you throw in self-medication and even prescription medication, then things can spiral out of control really fast.
Yeah. Purpose. We find ourselves finding purpose in the uniform, and it's great because you should. There's purpose in it. Greater purpose than just yourself. But just as you came in, you should have an exit plan.
That's one thing I always stress to people. Like I cannot stress volunteer service enough. I mean, of course, hey man, you want to get out, you want to get a good paying job or whatever. A job's a job, but like, if you're physically capable, and of course, if you enjoy this type, but like, I loved volunteering with the rescue squads in Jacksonville, in Swansboro, wherever you go to, if they got a volunteer fire department, if you can volunteer and do something, it's a great way to meet people, be a part of the community, give yourself a purpose. I mean, when you're in the military, every day you wake up, I got something to do. I don't know what it is, but somebody's going to tell me what I need to do that day, and you do it. When you get out, you don't have that accountability. But if you can find a volunteer thing, and again, I say this, if you don't have a satisfying job where, you have to dedicate a lot of resources. But if you're able to volunteer with things like, volunteer fire departments, and I use this because, I mean, let's face it, a lot of military folks are alpha type of people, and they miss the excitement. That's a whole nother piece that I didn't even touch. But, it gives you a little bit of that rush. If you're into that, you can join the Coast Guard, what is that called? The Coast Guard Auxiliary, if you live near water, and go make sure people's boats are safe and things like that. And they all have their little social functions and things. And it's great. It's great crack. That's Irish for a good time. But yeah, it's a good time. Yeah, finding the purpose. On my website, when I first started my website, I wrote an article about finding purpose. And when I go back and I look at some of the early articles I've written, they're kind of cheesy, but I was like, I don't even know where to start. I'm just going to start. But, I looked at some of the people I knew who were volunteer football coaches, volunteer baseball coaches at their high schools, military spouses who, were now dedicating themselves to their significant other as they continued their career and things like that. So yeah, definitely finding something, finding a purpose, something meaningful, not just something to do, but something that you can really throw yourself into and enjoy.
Thank you, Seamus, for that good gouge. We hit it. We hit mental health. We hit not Marines, but servicemen struggling with transition. Thank you for your backstory, your service to this country. Obviously, now you're overseas doing bigger and greater things. But
try it.
I would say, I know we touched a little bit, but for those that are about to take the 30-inch step the wrong way, because you talk about we're losing more to suicide after GWAT, and that's facts. You mentioned communication, you mentioned community, you mentioned purpose, but give them something tangible right now before they take that 30-inch step in the correct way.
So here's the thing, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I wouldn't be me if I didn't voice the unpopular. I almost feel like as a society, we've kind of glorified suicide. There was a time when we didn't talk about it. It was taboo, and it was like, we're not going to talk about that. I think now we talk about it too much, and we've talked about it so much, you see it in movies and TV, and because they have to work it into whatever the popular TV show is, and I think we've become a little bit desensitized to it, and it has become sort of a non-acceptable but acceptable way out. It's not a surprise anymore. It used to be somebody kills himself, like, oh my God. Now it's like, I was just waiting for it to happen, So now I say that not to say don't talk about it. I'm just saying, I think as a greater society, we've pushed it so far to the front that we've put it everywhere, and people now see it as a way out, an acceptable way out, because it was in their favorite TV show. Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect word, normalize it. Now, that being said, I would say something tangible, and I will die on this hill, go to the gym. I would say exercise, but ultimately go to the gym. And I say that because, as I mentioned before, I had done a lot of studying on the effects of weightlifting and how it affects the brain. One of the things that I've tried to do in my post-military career is to take a lot of really sciencey mumbo jumbo and make it easy to consume for, I love you guys, the 0311 community, and I say that with the utmost love, because the 0311s are some of the smartest people I've ever met.
That's true.
So I say that as maybe the 0331 community. But, without getting into like mechanisms and enzymes and, these pathways, I like to just take this information and I put it into something that the everyday person can understand without thinking too much about it. And that being said, the things that happen to the brain when we lift weights is quite fascinating. There's a lot of talk about anxiety. You hear people talking about not being able to be in crowded places and stuff like that, which I totally understand. What people often fail to realize is the human body was designed to handle anxiety. If we weren't anxious, you wouldn't worry about your kid getting too close to the street. Or I was with my son at the cliffs of Kilkee in Ireland, and he used to like to get near the edge, and all I could think is one good gust of wind and he's gone. The kid would drive me nuts. He would do it on purpose. But if we didn't have anxiety, those things that bother us wouldn't bother us, and we would be kind of careless, I think. The problem is when you are stuck in this state, these mechanisms that your body had, they get burnt out. Now, there's a lot of things, if you kind of get holistic, and you can get into gut health and neurotransmitters and all these things that happen. I'm not going to do that now. But when you lift weights, there are a lot of physiological processes that happen, which have shown to have cognitive benefit. They've shown to have reduced symptoms of anxiety and PTSD. They've shown to protect the brain. They make the brain stronger. So for me, the weight room is my number one drug of choice. Now, some people may say, well, Seamus, if lifting weights was so easy, how come athletes get depressed? Well, just like everything else, you can overdo it. And if you overtrain, then you're going to burn out. you're going to get sore, you're going to get inflammation, you're going to get fatigue, and then you're just going to be miserable. So even with weight training, like any other drug, it has to be dosed properly. Now, I can't just give one generalized dose for everybody, because then you're going to have to get into what's your goals, and this, that, and the other. But the take-home message is, number one, exercise. Number two, weight training specifically. And I have tons of articles about it on my own blog there. But so that would be my number one take-home. And you had mentioned your wife earlier with kind of a funny story for you. When I had started my own podcast, and I've kind of let it go by the wayside, but it was during COVID. I was having a hard time getting people to talk to. And my girlfriend's a web designer. And she does a lot of work with somebody in the spiritual community. She said, why don't you talk to this lady about Tantra? I said, what? Long story long, me and this lady are now very close friends. But the more that I thought about it, I said, well, if I look at the divorce rates of, military, firefighters, police officers, maybe there's something to this Tantra thing. Let me talk to this lady and see what's up. And we had a very deep and insightful two-part interview. And then eventually I ended up taking a course with her and becoming a Tantra facilitator. Now, you can imagine trying to get a bunch of alphas to sit around and get their child. You know what I mean? It's probably going to look like a monkey doing what to a football. But within that community, whether it's tantric meditation or yoga or Tai Chi, again, tons of scientific studies looking at the effects of these, I wouldn't just call them spiritual practices / soft martial arts, and how they reduce anxiety. Part of it has to do with breathing. Part of it has to do with just the calmness. Part of it has to do with the physiological changes of moving the body. But yeah, that Tantra piece, what I thought started out was going to be like, what the hell am I getting into? Actually turned out to be very insightful and much different than what most people think of tantric meditation.
Interesting. I'm about to look it up. Send me a little piece on it. That'd be dope.
Yeah,
I love to learn new things, experience new things. It's always good for any type of counseling. Yeah. So, Seamus, I appreciate your time. We appreciate your service. Appreciate your experience and willing to tell your story. Where can they reach out if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'm on X, Seamus _O'Connor. That's another story for another time, but that's the handle. I'm on Instagram as Wellness for Vets, Wellness FOR Vets. My website is wellnessforvets.info. And what else? I think that's all of them.
So okay, perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, Seamus O'Connor. That story will be for round two. And Gunny G, talk pulling pits and pins with your host. Obviously, follow, subscribe everywhere you get your podcast on all social media platforms. Let us know how we're doing. Any criticism is good criticism. Seamus and Gunny G. Ladies and gentlemen, we out. I'll talk to you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Is a podcast featuring active service members who discuss their thoughts and opinions on various issues surrounding military life, current events, and history. The statements heard here are the opinions of its members and guests. These do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense and are not endorsed or sponsored in any way. Listener, viewer discretion advised.